My name is Emily. I'm 21 years old, and the night of my graduation was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. Months of late nights, coffee-fueled study sessions, and endless self-doubt had finally led me to this celebration. Friends filled the rented hall with chatter and laughter, music pulsed through the speakers, and the air smelled of flowers and catered food my parents insisted on ordering at the last minute. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could belong. But as I stood there in my dress, diploma in hand, I realized that the weight pressing down on me had nothing to do with textbooks anymore. It hit me out of nowhere. At first, I thought it was nerves, the kind you shake off with a laugh and a sip of water. But the tightness in my chest didn't fade. My hands trembled as I held my glass, and before I could place it down, my knees buckled. The sound of laughter around me blurred into confusion, voices overlapping, shoes scraping against the floor as people rushed forward. My body hit the ground hard, the cold tiles pressing against my cheek, and everything spun. I remember gasps. Someone shouted my name, but I couldn't focus. My vision narrowed, like the world itself was being pulled through a tiny straw. I heard my friend Rachel yell, "Call 911. Her voice cracked, half command, half plea. My ears rang, drowning out the music that had filled the room only seconds earlier. All I could see were blurred shapes, people bending over me, their mouths moving in panic. Some looked horrified, others whispered. And beneath it all, a thought pierced through the fog. Where are my parents? The party was their idea. They had insisted on inviting their colleagues, distant relatives, and people I hardly even knew. They loved the performance of family pride, showing me off as an accomplishment rather than a person. But in that terrifying moment, when I lay helpless on the floor, they were nowhere to be found. I didn't see their faces breaking through the crowd, didn't feel their hands clutching mine. Just absence. The paramedics arrived fast. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, though to me it felt like hours. The wail of the sirens cut through the night, drowning out the frantic conversations. 2 EMTs knelt beside me, their practiced hands checking my pulse, shining a light into my eyes, speaking in clipped tones. One asked me my name, and I tried to respond, but my lips wouldn't move properly. The only sound that escaped was a weak groan, and tears burned at the corners of my eyes. "Stay with us," one of them said firmly, sliding an oxygen mask over my face. The air was sharp, filling my lungs in short bursts. I wanted to fight against the straps holding it in place, but I was too weak. My friends clustered nearby, their faces pale, their eyes wide. Rachel clutched my hand until they pulled me onto the stretcher, her voice shaking as she promised, "I'm not letting go." On the way to the ambulance, I caught bits of conversation, people murmuring theories. Some thought I fainted from excitement, others whispered darker suggestions. Their words stung, even though I could barely piece them together. Whispers have a way of carrying, especially when you're the one lying flat and powerless. The ride itself was a blur. The sirens echoed in my skull, each turn of the vehicle jostling me against the straps. The EMT sitting near my head kept asking questions. When did it start? Had I eaten? Was I on any medication? I could barely respond, only managing small nods or faint shakes of my head. The fear in his eyes told me more than his words. Something wasn't right. But what cut the deepest wasn't the pain in my chest or the dizziness clawing at my mind. It was when Rachel, holding my phone, whispered to the EMT that she had called my parents. "They said they can't come right now," she admitted softly, her eyes darting away from mine as though ashamed to deliver the news. "They're busy with your sister." Even through the haze, even strapped down and gasping for air, that sentence carved through me. They couldn't come. Not wouldn't. Couldn't. Because my sister needed them. Again. I closed my eyes then, not because I wanted to sleep, but because I couldn't bear to look at anyone. My body shook, not from illness, but from the cold realization that nothing I did, not even collapsing at my own graduation party, would ever make me enough for them. When we reached the hospital, the lights were harsh, fluorescent beams slicing through the fog of my vision. Nurses swarmed me, voices overlapping, shoes squeaking against polished floors. They lifted me onto a bed, attached monitors, checked fall lines. Beeps echoed around the room in a rhythm that made me both comforted and anxious. I tried to focus on them, to remind myself I was still alive. Rachel stood outside the glass doors, her face pressed to the small window, refusing to leave. I clung to that image like a lifeline, a friend who stayed, a friend who didn't turn away. But as the minutes ticked by, reality sank in. The people who should have been there weren't. Not when I fell. Not when the sirens wailed. Not when the hospital lights burned my eyes. The celebration that was supposed to honor me had ended with me alone, in a bed, realizing that blood doesn't guarantee love. And in that sterile room, with monitors beeping steadily at my side, the thought formed clear as glass. This moment wasn't just a collapse of my body. It was the collapse of everything I thought family meant. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor became my unwanted lullaby. Each beat reminded me I was still alive, though the hollow space inside me said otherwise. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave. I lay against stiff white sheets, staring at the ceiling tiles, each square blending into the next until my eyes blurred. I should have felt relief at being stable, but all I felt was emptiness. Rachel was the only one who came inside once visiting hours began. She perched on the stiff vinyl chair beside my bed, her legs pulled up, chin resting on her knees. Her hair was a tangled mess from crying, but she refused to go home. "I'll stay as long as you need," she whispered, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee. She tried to smile, but her lips quivered. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like neither of us dared say what we were really thinking. I wanted to ask her if my parents had called, if they had even asked how I was doing. But the words stuck in my throat. If she said no, it would only confirm the ache already gnawing at me. That first night, the nurses checked on me every hour. Their footsteps echoed in the hall, the squeak of rubber soles against polished tile. They adjusted my 4 noted numbers on their charts, and asked how I felt. I gave them the same answer every time: I don't know. Because I truly didn't. My body felt foreign, as though something inside me had betrayed me. When the doctor finally came in, it was well past midnight. He was a tall man with tired eyes, the kind that had seen too many emergencies in one lifetime. He pulled up the chart at the foot of my bed and cleared his throat. "Emily, we ran some tests. We're still waiting on the full results. But your collapse wasn't just exhaustion." Rachel leaned forward instantly, eyes sharp. "Then what was it?" The doctor hesitated before answering, as though choosing his words carefully. "Your system reacted as if it had been exposed to something unusual. We're trying to narrow it down." He glanced at me with a steady expression. "Do you remember eating or drinking anything that tasted off?" I blinked at him, my mind scrambling. The catered food, the endless stream of congratulations, the clinking glasses, it all blurred together. But then an image flickered. My glass. My father's hand brushing near it before he turned away. The thought made my stomach twist, but I shoved it down before it could grow teeth. I couldn't say that aloud. Not yet. Instead, I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't think so." My voice cracked like brittle paper. The doctor didn't press further, only scribbled something on the chart. "We'll keep monitoring you. For now, rest." After he left, Rachel turned to me, suspicion clouding her face. "You hesitated. Why?" I forced a weak smile. "I'm just tired." It was a lie, and she knew it, but she didn't push. She just reached for my hand, her palm warm against my cold fingers. The second night was worse. Sleep wouldn't come, no matter how heavy my eyelids felt. The hospital was quiet in a way that was almost cruel. Machines humming, distant doors clicking shut, the occasional muffled voice over the intercom. Each sound seemed magnified in the stillness. I stared at the glowing red numbers of the clock on the wall, watching the minutes drag by. When the nurse came to check on me at 2 in the morning, I finally asked, "Has anyone called for me?" She paused, a flicker of sympathy softening her face. Not that I've heard, sweetheart. Do you want me to double-check at the desk? I shook my head quickly, embarrassment burning my cheeks. I didn't want pity. What I wanted was my parents, but they were too busy, or too indifferent, to notice. On the third day, I was allowed to sit up and walk a few steps down the hallway. My legs trembled beneath me, weak and unsteady, but I forced myself to keep going. Other patients shuffled past, some with walkers, some wheeled in chairs, their eyes reflecting the same tired resignation I felt. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, and the linoleum floors felt colder than ice beneath my bare feet. Halfway back to my room, I spotted Rachel speaking to a nurse at the station. She looked frustrated, her hands waving slightly as though pleading for answers. I slowed my pace, watching unnoticed. They're saying it might not have been natural, I overheard her whisper fiercely. Then why aren't they telling us more? The nurse hushed her, catching sight of me. Rachel turned, her face softening instantly, but I had already heard enough to make my pulse quicken. Not natural. The words echoed in my chest like a drumbeat. That night, when Rachel finally left to shower and grab clean clothes, I was alone with my thoughts. I replayed everything from the party, the music, the laughter, the moment my glass slipped in my hand. My father's face surfaced again, his eyes avoiding mine all evening, his hand brushing near my drink. The image haunted me, but admitting it aloud felt dangerous, even in the quiet safety of my hospital room. By the fourth night, exhaustion finally dragged me into shallow sleep. Dreams twisted into nightmares, tables filled with glasses, faceless figures whispering, my father's hand pushing mine down until I couldn't breathe. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around me like restraints. My heart monitor beeped faster, loud enough that a nurse hurried in, adjusting wires, soothing me with calm words I'd barely heard. Morning light spilled through the blinds, golden and harsh. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharper than before. The doctor's words, Rachel's questions, the whispers, they all circled like vultures. Something wasn't adding up, and the silence of my parents only made it worse. When breakfast arrived, a bland tray of oatmeal and lukewarm tea, I stared at it without lifting a spoon. My stomach churned with unease, not hunger. The questions that had kept me awake at night now pressed harder. What happened to me? Why did it happen? And why did the people who should care the most act as if I didn't matter? As the beeping of the machines filled the room once more, I realized the hospital wasn't just where my body was healing. It had become the place where every unanswered question lingered, waiting to claw its way into the light. The oatmeal on the tray had gone cold, a grey paste I couldn't bring myself to touch. My stomach gnawed with hunger, but swallowing felt impossible. I kept staring at the untouched spoon, the blandness of it echoing the way I'd always been fed scraps of affection at home, just enough to keep me going, never enough to fill me. Lying back against the stiff pillow, I let my mind drift to places I didn't want it to go. The hospital walls blurred, and suddenly I was 10 years old again, sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table. My sister's school project, a papier-mâché solar system, sat proudly on display. Dad beamed at her, lifting the planets as though they were fragile works of art. "She's gifted," he said, his eyes glistening with pride. I had brought home my own project that same day, a watercolor painting of a meadow. It had smudges where the paper had buckled under too much water, but I thought it was beautiful. He never looked at it. He never looked at me. The memory stung sharper than the 4-needle taped to my hand. Even now, in the sterile hospital room, I could still feel the way my chest had tightened back then, desperate for a nod of approval that never came. That night, I had hung the painting on my bedroom wall myself, whispering, "It's enough. It has to be." But it never was. The door creaked open, pulling me back to the present. Rachel returned, her hair damp from the shower, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She set it down with a thud. "I brought you some clothes. Yours smelled like hospital," she said with a small smile. "Thanks," I murmured. She hesitated, then sat beside me. Emily, can I ask you something? And please don't shut me out. I turned to her, my throat tightening. Why do you look so surprised when people care about you? Her voice wasn't sharp, but it cut through me anyway. I forced a laugh, brittle and humorless. Habit, I guess. Rachel didn't smile back. That's not just habit. That's history. Her words dug into me like claws, pulling up years of being overlooked. Birthdays where my sister got the bigger cake, the shinier gifts. Family dinners where my achievements became footnotes while hers was celebrated with applause. I had learned early how to shrink myself, how to live in the shadows without complaint. Later that evening, after Rachel dozed off in the chair beside my bed, I stared at the ceiling again. The pattern of the tiles blurred, and in them, I saw fragments of my past. The spelling bee where I placed second, clutching my little silver medal with trembling hands, hoping Dad would be proud. He barely looked at me before sweeping my sister into his arms for winning her math competition that same week. The two moments fused together until only one mattered. Hayes. It wasn't just about trophies or grades. It was in the smaller things too. The way Mom always asked my sister first what she wanted for dinner. The way Dad bragged about her to neighbors, using words like brilliant and destined, while I stood there smiling, pretending it didn't matter. The bitterness was something I had buried deep, but now, in the quiet of this room, it rose up, uninvited. Maybe it was the vulnerability of lying in a hospital bed, or maybe it was the absence of my parents now, but the truth was harder to ignore. I had always been second best. The next morning, a nurse wheeled in a blood pressure machine. "We're going to keep monitoring your vitals," she said cheerfully, wrapping the cuff around my arm. I nodded, though my mind wasn't on her words. It was back in high school, standing on the track field after running a relay. I had finished strong, lungs burning, sweat soaking my shirt, but Dad hadn't been there to see it. He was across town, clapping for my sister at her debate finals. "You did great," the coach had told me, clapping me on the back. But great didn't matter when the people who were supposed to notice never did. As the cuff tightened around my arm, I realized that maybe the collapse wasn't just from exhaustion or something in my system. Maybe it was the weight of years spent carrying invisibility, the kind of heaviness that burrowed into your bones. Later that day, Rachel coaxed me into taking a few steps again. "You need to keep moving," she said softly. Her arm wrapped firmly around me as we shuffled down the hall. Other patients watched us, some offering small smiles. Halfway through, my legs buckled, and I gripped her tighter. "Sorry," I muttered, shame creeping in. "Stop apologizing," she snapped gently. "You don't need to say sorry for existing." Her words hit harder than any stumble. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I had spent my whole life apologizing, quietly, invisibly, for not being enough, for taking up space no one seemed to want me in. But the words stayed locked inside. That night, when the nurses dimmed the lights and Rachel drifted off again, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm tired of being second best." The confession was so quiet I wasn't sure if I had really said it. But the weight in my chest eased, if only slightly, as though speaking it out loud cracked something open. Dreams returned, this time less chaotic. I saw myself at a piano recital, fingers trembling over the keys. I had practiced for weeks, but the applause was lukewarm, drowned out by the booming cheer for my sister's performance after mine. In the dream, I stood up, bowed, and walked off stage into a hallway of shadows. Alone. Always alone. When I woke, dawn was seeping through the blinds. Rachel stayed, stretching in her chair. She caught me watching her and asked softly, "Bad night?" I nodded, but then, after a pause, I added, "It wasn't just last night. It's been every night, for as long as I can remember." Her brows furrowed. "Emily, I've never been first. Not once. Not in their eyes." My voice cracked, raw. "It's always her. Always." Rachel's silence said more than words. She reached over, squeezed my hand, and didn't let go. As the morning sounds of the hospital grew louder, nurses exchanging shifts, cots rattling down the halls, I realized something had shifted inside me. The pain of being overlooked wasn't new, but naming it made it undeniable. And though my parents' absence still cut deep, I couldn't escape the truth that had followed me into adulthood, into this hospital bed, into every breath I took. I had spent a lifetime being second best, and the question that lingered now, heavier than any diagnosis, was how much longer I could live that way. I had spent a lifetime being second best, and the question that lingered now, heavier than any diagnosis, was how much longer I could live that way. The thought trailed me long after the nurse changed the sheets and after Rachel left to grab coffee. Silence pressed in from every corner of the room, so thick I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling lights. I reached for the tray table, dragging it closer. The metal leg screeched against the tile, and I winced, afraid someone might rush in and ask what I was doing. But no one came. The drawer of the table held a pen and a stack of thin notepad sheets stamped with the hospital's logo. I pulled them out, my fingers trembling as though they already knew the weight of what I was about to do. For years, words had lived inside me, unsaid, unshared, unacknowledged. Tonight, they demanded a home outside my chest. I pressed the pen to the paper. At first, the ink refused to flow, scratching faintly as I carved the first line. To Mom and Dad. I stared at it for a long time, as if the 3 words alone might send me spiraling back into silence. But instead of crumbling, something steadied. The letters began to pour. I don't know if you'll ever understand this, but I need you to see me, really see me, for once in your lives. I'm tired of being invisible, tired of swallowing the hurt every time you chose how over me, tired of wondering if your love was something I was supposed to earn instead of something you were meant to give. The sentences came jagged, uneven, but they were mine. Each one etched into the page with the force of years. I paused, chewing on the pen cap. My heart thundered, but it wasn't just fear. It was release. The note wasn't polished, but it was honest. For once, there were no careful smiles, no rehearsed lines. Just me. I wrote about the spelling bee medal, about the piano recital, about every birthday that felt like a second-hand celebration. I wrote about hospital rooms and quiet tears, about collapsing under silence that had never once broken in my favor. By the time I stopped, 3 pages lay filled, ink smudged where my hand had dragged across wet lines. My eyes burned, but I couldn't tell if it was from tears or exhaustion. I folded the sheets carefully, creasing them into a small rectangle. My hand lingered, pressing down the edges as though sealing a truth I had finally dared to name. That was when Rachel returned. She stepped in quietly, holding 2 paper cups, steam curling upward. Her eyes landed on the folded note in my lap. "What's that?" she asked gently, setting the cups down. I hesitated. Something I should have said a long time ago. Her gaze softened, but she didn't pry. She sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The folded paper seemed to breathe between us, alive with everything it held. Rachel finally whispered, "Are you going to give it to them?" My throat tightened. I don't know. Part of me thinks they'll tear it up before reading past the first line. Part of me doesn't care anymore. Her hand brushed mine, a quiet reassurance. It's not about whether they are ready for it. It's about whether you are. That night, after Rachel drifted to sleep in the chair again, I turned the note over in my hands. I thought of leaving it on my parents' doorstep, sliding it into their mailbox, or even sending it as a photo in a text message. Every option felt both terrifying and liberating. I tucked the note beneath my pillow. Somehow, just knowing it existed was enough to keep me breathing evenly until sleep came. The next morning, a ray of sunlight slipped between the blinds, landing squarely on the corner of the note that peeked out. It felt like a signal, subtle, persistent, impossible to ignore. When Rachel stayed awake, I pulled the paper out again. "Do you want to hear it?" I asked. She blinked, still half asleep, then nodded. I unfolded the pages and began to read aloud. My voice cracked on the first lines, but as the words spilled out, something shifted. The room felt larger, the air clearer. I could see Rachel's eyes glisten, her jaw tighten in places where the words cut deeper than I intended. When I finished, silence settled between us. Rachel exhaled slowly. Emily, that's not just a note. That's your truth. Her reaction was more than I expected, but I realized she was right. This wasn't just about telling my parents how they had failed me. It was about reclaiming the space I had been denied my whole life. But fear still lingered. What if the note shattered what little connection remained? What if speaking my truth meant losing them entirely? Rachel must have read my thoughts, because she said quietly, "They weren't ready for you when you were a child. They weren't ready for your voice then. That doesn't mean they'll never be ready now." Her words echoed long after she left to grab lunch. Alone again, I traced the ink on the page, each letter a scar that had finally been named. I didn't know if I would hand it to them today, tomorrow, or ever. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of them not being ready. The note existed, and so did I. And that was a beginning. I didn't hand them the note. Not yet. But the act of writing it had shifted something inside me, and when I looked in the mirror the next morning, I saw someone I barely recognized. The girl who used to bend herself into silence just to be tolerated was gone. What stayed back at me was quieter, steadier, still fragile, but not breakable. That day, when the nurse brought in my discharge papers, I didn't feel the usual panic about where I'd go next. For once, the question didn't paralyze me. Rachel stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed, watching me like she always did when she was waiting to see if I'd ask for help. "You're not going back there, are you?" she asked, her tone careful but edged with certainty. I shook my head. No, not this time. The words hung in the air, shocking even me, but I meant them. Rachel drove me home, her home, not mine. She had a small apartment above a bookstore, filled with shelves that sagged under the weight of novels she swore she'd read someday. When she pushed open the door, I was hit with the warm, heavy scent of coffee beans and old paper. A tabby cat curled on the window ledge blinked at me with bored approval. "You can stay here," she said, almost too casually, setting my bag by the couch. "As long as you need." It should have felt like charity, but it didn't. Something about the way she said it, like she wasn't offering me a place to crash but a place to belong, made my throat tighten. That night, while Rachel read on the couch and the cat claimed my lap, I unfolded the note again. For a moment, I considered tearing it up. Maybe my parents didn't deserve to read it. Maybe it was only meant for me. But instead of destroying it, I slid it into the back of one of Rachel's empty photo frames. A placeholder, a reminder. The following days blurred into something soft and unremarkable. Coffee runs, quiet dinners, late-night conversations that stretched past midnight. But beneath the small routines was something radical. Safety. For the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for the next dismissal, the next comparison, the next reminder that I wasn't enough. One evening, Rachel caught me staring at the notes outline in the frame. "Still thinking about them?" she asked. "Always," I admitted, but not the same way. It's like, I'm finally learning to live without waiting for them to notice me. She smiled faintly. That's the thing about family. Sometimes you're born into it. Sometimes you build it. Her words stuck. The building began slowly. I started volunteering at the bookstore downstairs, mostly to help Rachel organize the chaos of titles, but it turned into more than that. Customers came and went, students, retirees, parents with children, and each interaction stitched me a little closer to the world, a little closer to belonging. One Saturday, a girl about 8 years old lingered at the counter, clutching a book too big for her hands. "Do you think I can read this?" she asked, her eyes wide. I crouched to her level, remembering the way I once reached for things I was told weren't mine. "I think you can," I said. "And if you get stuck, that's what bookmarks are for." Her grin was so wide it startled me. Watching her bounce out the door, I realized I had given her something I had always wanted, permission to try. That night, when Rachel and I closed up, she nudged me. "You're good with kids." I laughed, shaking my head. I wouldn't know the first thing about raising one. "You don't have to. Sometimes it's enough to just show up." Her words burrowed deep. I thought about my parents, about all the times they hadn't shown up, and for the first time, the thought didn't cut as sharply. It was a scar now, not an open wound. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from my parents, and I stopped checking my phone for their names. The note remained in the frame, untouched but alive, like a seed planted in soil I might never return to. And I was okay with that. One evening, Rachel invited a few friends over, people I had only heard about in her stories. The apartment filled with laughter, the kind that rattled picture frames and clinked glasses. Someone handed me a plate of pasta. Someone else dragged me into a conversation about books I hadn't read. And before I realized it, I was laughing too. I caught myself in the middle of it all, smiling, leaning in, being seen. And it hit me. This is family. Not because we shared blood, but because we shared presence, choice, care. Later that night, as the last guest left and Rachel stacked dishes in the sink, I whispered, "I think I found it." She turned, confused. "Found what?" "Family," I said simply. Her eyes softened, and she pulled me into a hug. No speeches, no grand declarations, just warmth, steady and unshakable. As I lay in bed afterward, the cat purring at my feet, I realized something I never thought possible. Walking away hadn't meant losing everything. It had meant finding room to begin again. And this time, I wasn't second best.